My pregnant daughter-in-law smirked and said, "Relax, we only sent a girl to tempt your son to see if he'd cheat." For a second, I thought I'd misheard her. The kitchen light buzzed faintly above us, casting a cold, hard glow over the crumbs on the table and the half-empty glass of water in front of my boy. He was still in his gym clothes, t-shirt damp with sweat, hair flattened to his forehead, eyes unfocused like he'd been hit by a car instead of finishing a workout. My daughter-in-law was wrapped around his arm, belly pressed to his side, hugging him like she'd just forgiven some great sin. But the only sin in that room was the way she was smiling. "I told you he'd pass," she said, voice high and bright, looking at me over his shoulder as if I should be proud of what they'd done. "Didn't I say he's loyal? Mom?" She calls me Mom when she wants something, or when she's done something she knows is wrong and wants to soften it with a word. I gripped the back of the chair to keep my hands from shaking. My knuckles went white against the worn wood. My son wouldn't meet my eyes. He stared at the floor, jaw tight, the muscle in his cheek twitching. "Can we not talk about this?" he muttered. "Oh, don't be so dramatic," she said, patting his chest as if he were a child sulking after a harmless prank. "It was just a little test. You passed. That's all that matters." A test. I heard that word, and something inside me went very still. For months, I'd watched her snap at him over dinners, insult the food he cooked, then scrape the plate clean and complain it tasted like trash. I'd watched her accuse him of not finding her attractive anymore while he stood there after 14-hour days, eye sockets bruised from lack of sleep, saying nothing, just swallowing it all like tasteless medicine. "A test," I repeated slowly. My voice didn't sound like my own. "You sent a woman to flirt with my son." She shrugged, almost playful. "Not just some woman, a friend of a friend. We asked Lily's cousin to go up to him after the gym, see how he'd react. We needed to know if he was still fully committed." She said it like she was talking about checking the brakes on a used car. "What did you do?" I asked him quietly. He finally lifted his gaze to me. His eyes were red-rimmed. Not from crying, he doesn't cry, but from the kind of exhaustion that sinks deep into the bones. "I told her I was married," he said. "I walked away. And then he came home," his wife cut in, tightening her arms around him. "And I apologized because I realized maybe I was being a bit crazy, pregnancy hormones and all that." She laughed lightly, like it was an inside joke between us women. "But see? Now I know for sure I can trust him." For a moment, no one spoke. The hum of the refrigerator filled the silence, and a car passed outside, headlights sliding briefly across the blinds. That sound, that light, felt louder than any of us. "You needed to know for sure?" I asked, still looking at her, not blinking. "After he's been working 80 hours a week to keep a roof over your head and prepare for this baby, you needed to send a stranger to corner him after the gym." She rolled her eyes just slightly, the way young people do when they think older people are being dramatic or old-fashioned. "You don't understand, Mom. Things are different now. Everyone cheats. We read that like, 70% of men will cheat at some point? Lily said it. It's better to know now before the baby comes." My son flinched when she said, "Everyone cheats." It was a tiny movement, a small tightening of his shoulders, but I saw it. I've been watching that boy since I first held him in a hospital room with flickering fluorescent lights and a nurse who forgot to bring the warm blanket. I know every line on his face, every wince he tries to hide. "How long did you plan this?" I asked. She sighed, as if she were already tired of this conversation. "It was just a silly idea we had the other day. I was telling Lily I was scared you'd start pulling away," she continued, looking up at him with big, wounded eyes. "You've been so tired, so distant. You barely touch me anymore." So she said, "Let's test him." That's all. And now we know. He passed. "So why are you making this a big deal?" "Because you turned my son into a lab rat," I wanted to say. "Because you planted a doubt in him he didn't have before. Because you treated his loyalty as something cheap enough to gamble for fun. Instead, I watched him, my boy, my grown man, sink into the chair like his spine had given out. He rubbed his forehead, fingers trembling just enough for me to notice. "I told you it wasn't funny," he said under his breath. She let out a small laugh. "You'll get over it. Come on. You're the hero of the story." The girl flirted. "You said no. End of story." She turned to me again. "Isn't that what really matters?" The overhead light flickered, a brief dimming that made everyone's faces look harsher for a heartbeat. Her smile looked sharper in the sudden shadow. His eyes looked emptier. I drew in a slow breath. "What if he hadn't passed?" I asked softly. She hesitated, just for a fraction of a second, then waved it away. "Then at least I'd know before tying myself to him forever," she said. "I told Lily if he even thought about saying yes, I'd kick him out and go stay with my mom. I'm not going to be stuck with some cheater my whole life." "And what about him?" I asked. "If you had been wrong about him, if this little game had pushed him over the edge?" She frowned, as if I'd said something rude. "Well, then that's on him, isn't it? If he cheats, that's his choice. We didn't make him do anything." My son's hand dropped to the table, fingers splayed on the cheap laminate. I noticed the faint red line where his wedding ring had been digging into his skin. He stared at his own hand like it belonged to someone else. "I didn't cheat," he said. "I did what you say you wanted, and somehow I still feel like I did something wrong." That sentence sank into me like ice water. He hadn't raised his voice. He wasn't shouting, but in his eyes I saw something break, a trust, not in her, but in himself. A man can survive being tired. He can survive insults, long hours, bad meals. But when he starts to doubt his own goodness, that's when he starts to disappear. She went quiet then, just for a heartbeat too long. The silence stretched, heavy and uncomfortable. The neighbor's dog barked outside, a sharp echo against the thin walls. She tightened her grip on his arm as if afraid he might pull away, then forced a small laugh. "You're overthinking this," she said quickly. "It's just a story we'll tell one day, right? Remember when we tested you and you passed? It proves we're solid." I looked at them both, my son shrinking into his own body, my daughter-in-law clinging to him with a smile that didn't reach her eyes, and I felt something harden in my chest. I'd stayed out of their marriage, let them work through their own storms, blame the mood swings on hormones and stress. But this wasn't just mood. This was cruelty dressed up as security. "Does your mother know you play these kinds of games with people's lives?" I asked her quietly. Her head snapped toward me, eyes narrowing just a touch. She didn't answer, but the way she stiffened told me everything I needed to know. And as the silence settled again, cold and sharp as the light above us, I realized that if my son couldn't see what this was doing to him yet, it might fall to me to decide how much longer I was going to watch them ruin him in his own home. The air in the kitchen felt heavier the next morning, as if someone had turned down the oxygen while I slept. I came in quietly, not wanting to wake anyone, but they were already there. My son sitting at the table with a mug he wasn't drinking from, and his wife standing by the sink, scrolling on her phone with the stiff posture of someone pretending everything was normal. She glanced over her shoulder when she heard my footsteps. "Morning, Mom," she said, voice bright in a way that didn't match her eyes. "We're thinking of reorganizing the bedroom today. It's too cluttered for the baby." My son didn't look up. He traced the rim of the mug slowly, round and round, like a man counting circles because straight lines were too much to handle. She must have noticed because she walked over and touched his shoulder. "You okay? You look tired." He didn't move away, but he didn't lean in either. "Didn't sleep well," he said. "You should have taken the melatonin," she replied, sounding annoyed more than worried. "You're useless without sleep." That flicker again in his eyes, the quiet flinch he learned to hide around her. He lifted the mug to his lips, took a small sip, and set it back down without comment. I opened a cupboard to get a pan and she immediately stepped in beside me, reaching over my shoulder to grab something else, forcing me to step aside. It wasn't overtly hostile, but it wasn't accidental either. I felt the message in how her arm edged me out of the space. I'd seen this kind of subtle claiming of territory before. My late sister-in-law used to do it in family gatherings, marking every corner of the room she wanted to dominate. "You know," she said casually, "I talked to Lily last night. She said we should do more tests like that, just to make sure the relationship is still strong before the baby comes." My son's shoulders tensed instantly. I set the pan down slowly, keeping my voice steady. "More tests?" She waved her hand. "Not like that, just little things. Seeing how he reacts if I do certain things, or if I don't do them." He finally lifted his eyes. "We're not doing that," he said, voice low. She blinked at him, surprised by the firmness. "It's just advice." He shook his head. "No more of that." His voice cracked slightly, like the end of the word was too thin to hold weight. She crossed her arms, her expression shifting into the defensive pout I had come to recognize. "Why are you acting like this? You're making me feel like I can't trust you." "You shouldn't need tests to trust me," he said softly. "I've never given you a reason not to." "But you never tell me anything," she snapped, her voice rising. "You come home tired, you barely talk, you go straight to bed. What am I supposed to think? You don't even try anymore." He opened his mouth to answer, then closed it again. His silence stretched long enough that she rolled her eyes dramatically. "See? This is what I mean. You shut down." His hand tightened around the mug until his knuckles whitened. A door slammed somewhere outside, a neighbor leaving for work, but the sharp noise made my son flinch harder than it should have. A moment later, he got up abruptly, chair scraping harshly across the floor. He rinsed the mug under the tap, hands moving too fast like he needed something to do to keep from folding in on himself. She watched him with narrowed eyes. "Are you angry at me?" He paused, back still turned. "I'm tired," he said again. "That's not an answer." He said nothing. The silence between them thickened, and I could feel the pressure in the room build, not with yelling, but with the weight of her insistence that he explain something he didn't have words for. She let out a slow breath, then turned to me as if suddenly remembering I was standing there. "Mom, don't you think a woman has a right to make sure the father of her child is faithful?" My son's shoulders stiffened. I kept my tone steady. "A woman has a right to feel safe, but safety doesn't come from trapping someone in situations designed to make them fail." Her lips tightened. It wasn't a trap. I looked at her, really looked at her. She had one hand on her hip, chin lifted, eyes sharp despite the soft swell of pregnancy making her look younger than she was. She believed every word she said, or needed to. That belief was part of how she justified the things she did. "It felt like one to him," I said gently. "That's not my fault," she shot back. "He's too sensitive lately." My son didn't defend himself. That, more than anything, told me how deeply this had sunk into him. He wasn't even trying to explain himself anymore. He was bracing. She walked past him deliberately, brushing her shoulder against him on purpose. "You're supposed to be my partner," she said quietly, "not someone I have to guess about all the time." He closed his eyes briefly. "I'm here," he whispered. "I'm doing everything I can." She scoffed. "Well, it's not enough if I'm still questioning everything." The words hit him hard, so hard that his hand slipped and the mug slipped from his fingers. It fell into the sink with a loud crack. Not broken, but loud enough to make her jump. He stared at the mug as if it were something dangerous, then stepped back from it like he was afraid to touch anything else he might drop. "You see," she said sharply, "you're distracted. You weren't like this before. You've changed." He whispered, barely audible. "I'm tired of being tested." For an instant, just an instant, she looked guilty, But just as quickly, her expression hardened again, the guilt replaced by indignation. "I'm the one carrying your child," she snapped. "My emotions matter too." A car honked outside, sharp and impatient. My son closed his eyes again, the sound hitting him like another blow. She moved toward him, expecting him to hold her automatically like he always did whenever she demanded comfort. But he didn't move. He stayed rooted, hands gripping the counter, eyes unfocused. She froze mid-step. "You're pulling away," she whispered. "I knew it." He looked up finally, exhausted, defeated. "I'm right here," he said again. But it didn't sound like a reassurance. It sounded like a confession. I felt something in the room shift then, not loudly, quietly, like the first crack in a wall that had been holding too much weight for too long. She backed away from him, breathing fast. "If you don't want me, just say it." He shook his head quickly. "That's not what I said." "That's what it feels like." She wasn't yelling, but the tension in her voice was sharp enough to cut glass. She turned, grabbed her coat from the chair, and shoved her feet into her slippers. "I'm going to Lily's," she said. "Maybe she understands what it's like to feel abandoned." She slammed the door behind her. The house went quiet except for the faint ticking of the kitchen clock. He stood there, motionless, hands braced on the counter, staring at nothing. I stepped closer. "She shouldn't have spoken to you that way." He let out a hollow laugh. "She's pregnant. She says she can't help it." I touched his arm gently. "That wasn't hormones. That was fear and control." He swallowed hard. "I don't even know what to do anymore." A gust of cold air came through the door she hadn't closed fully. It rustled the corner of a paper on the table, lifting it just barely before settling again. My son didn't move to close the door. He didn't move at all. And for the first time, I saw something break in him completely. Not loudly, not visibly, but in the quiet way a man loses trust in the ground beneath his feet. I stepped toward the door to shut it, but before I touched the handle, I heard footsteps coming back up the path. Fast, angry, determined. She wasn't done. I didn't grow up in a loud home. The house where I was raised always seemed to hold its breath. Even as a little girl, I learned to listen more than I spoke, because silence told me things long before people did. My mother used to say that a house's character is in its sounds. The hum of the old refrigerator when money was tight and we couldn't afford to fix it, the whistling draft coming from under the back door each winter, the sputtering kitchen light that flickered whenever the wiring strained. I suppose that's why I notice those details so much even now. They were the background of my life long before I had a son or a family of my own. When I was 10, that backdoor draft used to seep right into my bones. I'd sit at the kitchen table doing homework while my mother kneaded dough at the counter. Flour dusted the air, settling into her hair like early snow. She'd glance toward the door every time the wind rattled it, muttering about weather stripping we couldn't afford. She wasn't a bitter woman, just tired in a way I didn't understand until I became a mother myself. My father left when I was 14. He didn't shout or break furniture or make a scene. He simply packed 2 bags while my mother folded laundry, kissed the top of my head without meeting my eyes, and walked out into that same winter draft. The door closed quietly behind him. I remember thinking how strange it was that something so small, a latch sliding into place, could change the shape of a whole life. My mother didn't cry until hours later. She sat at the kitchen table with the overhead light flickering above her. Each blink of the bulb revealed a little more of the truth she couldn't hide. That was the first time I understood that silence could hurt as much as any blow. Years later, when I moved into my first apartment, I noticed the hum of the cheap refrigerator right away. It reminded me of home, of nights when my mother and I sat together in the glow of that weak kitchen light, trying our best to stretch dinners and hope at the same time. I worked 3 jobs back then, cleaning offices at dawn, cashiering at a drugstore through the afternoon, and stocking shelves at a small grocer until late at night. I wasn't proud, I was determined. And every time I came home after midnight, the sound of that refrigerator humming in the dark steadied me. It felt like I had made something of my own life, however small. Then I met the man who became my husband. He was quiet, gentle, and steady in a way I didn't trust at first. I'd learned early that steadiness could vanish without warning, but he stayed, patiently easing his way into my world. He worked construction. Roughening his hands for a paycheck he guarded carefully. We built a simple life together. Nothing fancy, nothing extravagant, just two people who took turns holding each other up. Our son came a few years later. The night he was born, the hospital room light flickered slightly, the way cheap lights do when the wiring is older than the paint on the walls. A nurse apologized, saying someone was supposed to fix it. I didn't mind. That familiar rhythm, light, shadow, light, felt like a reminder that life doesn't wait for perfect conditions. It shows up exactly as it is, raw edges and all. When they placed my son in my arms, I remember thinking he was the first thing in my life no one could take from me. His tiny fingers curled around mine, strong despite his size, and as I held him close, I promised myself I'd give him better than what I'd grown up with. My husband passed when our boy was 12, too young for such a loss, old enough to understand what it meant. The hum in our kitchen back then became my companion again, filling the quiet spaces after my son went to bed. I worked double shifts at a small factory, packing boxes and labeling shipments until my hands cramped. I didn't complain. I wanted him to have a childhood untouched by the weight I carried. He grew into a thoughtful young man, one who listened more than he spoke, like me. He worked hard, studied harder, and never once gave me trouble. When he landed his first steady job, he came home and hugged me so tightly that I felt the years of worry lift off my chest for the first time since he was little. He told me he wanted to take care of me the way I'd taken care of him. I laughed and swatted his arm and told him I wasn't old yet, but inside I felt something warm settle where years of strain had lived. When he met her, his future wife, she was shy around me at first, polite, soft-spoken. She used to bring me small gifts, scented candles, a scarf for winter, cookies she baked herself. I remember thinking she was exactly what he needed, someone gentle, someone kind, someone who would give him the softness he'd never had enough of. The first time she visited our home, she commented on the draft coming from under the kitchen door. "You should fix that," she said lightly. "Cold air like that will make your energy bill skyrocket." I smiled because I'd heard the same complaint my whole life. That draft didn't bother me anymore. It was woven into the rhythm of home. But her noticing it didn't bother me then. It meant she paid attention. I took it as a good sign. When they got married, the overhead light in the reception hall flickered during their first dance. My son laughed and pulled her closer. She looked up at him with a kind of devotion that eased every worry I'd ever had. People always say you can't know someone fully until life tests them, but in that moment I felt certain my son would be cherished. For a while, she was. Their early years together were full of homemade meals, weekend outings, laughter echoing through phone calls when they talked to me about their plans. I didn't see any cracks then. If anything, I saw how much she depended on him, how she leaned into him, how she asked for his opinion on small things, how she made sure he knew she valued him. But slowly, almost imperceptibly, something began to shift. The first time I noticed it was during a dinner I made for them. I served baked chicken, one of my son's favorites, and she took a bite, nodded, and said, "It's good," before putting down her fork. But then she whispered to my son, thinking I couldn't hear, "It's too dry, isn't it?" He glanced at me quickly, guilt flickering across his face. He said nothing, but something inside me tightened. A small comment, yes, but it carried a tone I'd heard before, a tone that chipped instead of supported. Another time, she criticized the way he folded laundry. She pulled a shirt from the basket, held it up like it was a problem she needed to solve, and told him he was doing it wrong. He laughed nervously, trying to play it off. but his shoulders fell just slightly. Little things, small corrections, gentle at first, then sharper. She used to sit beside him on the couch with her legs draped over his, but eventually she began to sit slightly apart, making subtle comments about how he never initiated affection anymore. He'd move closer then, offering reassurance, but she'd pull away just enough to keep him uncertain. When she got pregnant, I hoped it would bring them closer. I hoped the better parts of her, the kindness I first saw, would return. And sometimes they did. She had moments where she glowed with anticipation, moments when she held her belly protectively and spoke softly to the life growing inside her. But just as often she wielded her vulnerability like a weapon. She complained about his cooking, demanded he remake dishes even after long work days, then ate every bite while telling him it tasted awful. She accused him of being distant, of losing interest, of not loving her the way he used to. I'd watch him weather those accusations silently, as if every word was another small stone pressing down on him. The first time I heard her yell at him, I froze in the hallway. Her voice rose over something trivial, the wrong brand of yogurt. He apologized 3 times, then offered to go back to the store. Even though he'd worked 13 hours that day, she told him she didn't want a replacement. She wanted him to do things right the first time. The hum of their refrigerator filled the silence as he walked past me, keys already in hand, eyes hollow. I wanted to say something, I didn't. I told myself it wasn't my place, that marriages have rough patches, that pregnancy is hard on a woman's emotions. I convinced myself this would pass, but it didn't pass. It deepened. Sometimes, when I visited, the overhead light in their living room would flicker slightly, the way lights do in older homes. He'd get up immediately to tap the switch or adjust the bulb, embarrassed by it. She'd sigh loudly, complaining that she couldn't relax with things constantly malfunctioning. It wasn't the light that mattered. It was how he shrank. I started coming over more often, partly to help, partly to make sure he had at least one person who saw him. In the quiet moments when she was asleep or out with her friends, he'd sit with me at the kitchen table. The same kind of hum from the refrigerator that once steadied me now filled their small apartment too. It seemed louder on nights when he was worn thin. "Mom," he said once, staring at his hands, "I don't know why nothing I do feels right anymore." I reached across the table and touched his fingers. He didn't look up. The hum of the appliance covered the ache in his voice, just enough to keep him from breaking. I should have pushed harder. I should have told him what I saw, that no amount of effort can satisfy someone who uses doubt to feel powerful, but I didn't want to widen the gulf between them. I didn't want to be the reason he questioned his marriage. So I stayed quiet, and silence, the familiar companion of my childhood, settled into their home too. By the time she admitted to testing his loyalty, I'd already seen the slow erosion of his confidence. Not one big event, but small cuts, agreement by agreement, apology by apology, step by step into the shadows of someone else's insecurity. And standing in their kitchen now, I could feel that same old childhood draft beneath the door, brushing cold against my ankles. A warning I had ignored once already. A warning I wasn't sure I could ignore again. The first time I truly understood how deep this was cutting into him, it was over a bowl of soup. I had come over in the late afternoon with a small pot of chicken and rice, the way my mother used to make when anyone in the house felt worn down. The hallway outside their apartment smelled faintly of someone else's dinner and cleaning chemicals. When I knocked, no one answered at first. I almost turned away, thinking they were out. But then I heard the faint scrape of a chair and slow footsteps. He opened the door halfway like he wasn't sure he wanted the world inside. His face was pale, shadows carved under his eyes. For a second, when he saw me, his shoulders dropped in relief. "Hey, Ma," he said quietly. "You didn't tell me you were coming." "I brought food," I said, lifting the pot. "You look like you need it." He moved aside to let me in. The apartment felt colder than usual, not from the weather, but from the way the air just sat there. The draft under the balcony door slipped across the floor like a thin blade, brushing my ankles the way it did in my old house. The overhead living room light flickered twice before settling into a weak glow. "Where is she?" I asked gently. "Bedroom," he said. "She's mad." "What happened?" He hesitated. "I got home late. Again." I knew he'd been doing 80-hour weeks for months. I'd seen his schedule, his paycheck stub. "You working late doesn't mean you've done something wrong," I said. He didn't respond. Just walked to the kitchen, opened a cupboard, then closed it again without taking anything. That small, restless movement spoke louder than words. The bedroom door opened and she came out, one hand on her lower back, the other pressed to her belly. She looked tired too, but there was an edge to her gaze. "Oh," she said when she saw me, "I didn't know you were coming." "I texted you," he said quietly. She waved a dismissive hand. "My phone's charging. It was dead." "I brought soup," I said. "Thought you both might like something warm." She eyed the pot skeptically. "As long as he didn't cook it," she muttered. My son looked at the floor. I set the pot on the counter without answering. Silence settled for a moment, thick and uncomfortable. The refrigerator hummed loudly, filling the space between our breaths. "I heard you two had a rough day," I said lightly, trying to soften the air. She let out a sharp laugh that didn't sound amused. "We wouldn't if he listened to me." He winced. "What happened?" I asked, though part of me already knew the answer didn't really matter. It would be something small, inflated until it looked like a reason. She crossed her arms. "I told him to come home straight after work. I wanted us to have dinner together, just us, before the baby gets here and everything changes. I cooked. I was trying, you know." My son swallowed. "I got stuck at work," he said. "There was a problem with a client account. I called. You called once," she cut in. "And then what?" "You just decided it was fine to stroll in 2 hours late?" "I don't stroll anywhere after a 14-hour shift," he said. The words were tired, not sharp, but to her they might as well have been a slap. Her voice rose. "You're always tired. You're always working. You're never here. It feels like I'm doing this pregnancy alone." "You're not alone," he said. But the way he said it sounded like someone clinging to a script he was afraid to deviate from. She pointed toward the stove. A pot sat there, lid slightly askew, the food inside dried and congealed. "You know what I did? I threw it out. The dinner I made, because it got cold while I waited for you. And I thought, why bother? Why bother cooking for someone who won't even show up?" He looked at the pot, jaw tightening. "I told you I couldn't just walk out. I could get fired." "And then where would we be?" she snapped. "You don't think I know that? You don't think I worry about that every second? You think I like feeling like I have to test you to see if you still care?" The words hung between them. I watched his face fall. "It was one night," he said, "one dinner." "That's the problem," she whispered, eyes glistening. "It's never just one anything with you anymore." I opened the soup, the steam rising in soft curls. The smell of chicken and rice filled the kitchen, warm and familiar, but it felt wrong in that cold room. "Why don't we sit down and eat?" I said. "Maybe things will feel easier after." She looked at the pot, then at him. "No," she said. "I'm not hungry." "You should eat something," he murmured. She smirked. "Why? So you can complain about how I look later? So you can say pregnancy made me unattractive?" His head snapped up, startled. "I've never said that." "You don't have to," she said. "I see the way you look at me." He looked like she'd slapped him. His lips parted, but no sound came out. The silence that followed wasn't just a pause, it was a choke. He blinked rapidly as if trying to push down words he didn't trust himself to say. I watched his throat work, watched his shoulders rise and fall. He was breathing too shallowly. My fingers tightened around the ladle. "That's not fair," I said quietly. She turned to me, eyes flashing. "What's not fair is everyone always taking his side because he's the hard-working husband. No one said." He gets to be the hero, she continued, cutting me off, while I get called crazy for having feelings. No one called you crazy, my son said, voice thin. You called yourself that, remember? When you said it was hormones, so now it's my fault. Her tone sharpened, the softness gone. Of course, it's always my fault. I'm the villain because I don't just sit here and clap for him while he ignores me. His mouth opened, closed, opened again. Then he simply stepped back as if absorbing the blow. Every argument seemed to end that way, with her wielding hurt and fear like a blade, and him putting his hands behind his back so he wouldn't raise them to defend himself. I set the ladle down. It clicked against the edge of the pot. You both are under pressure, I said softly, but tearing each other down won't make it easier. She laughed again, but there was no joy in it. That's the thing. I don't feel like we're both under pressure. I feel like I'm under pressure, and he's somewhere else. My son whispered, I'm right here. She looked at him with a gaze that cut straight through him. Then why do I feel like I'm always talking to your empty chair? He flinched. It was a small movement, but it split the moment in half. For a second, I thought he might finally say something sharp in return, something that would defend him, set a boundary. Instead, his shoulders slumped. I'm going to shower, he said quietly. I'll eat later. He walked out of the kitchen like the air itself was pushing him. When he was gone, she sank into a chair, suddenly deflated. She pressed her hands to her face and let out a long, ragged breath. I didn't mean to say all that, she muttered. I watched her for a moment, torn between compassion and anger. She looked small then, under the flickering light, shadows cutting across her features. I could see the fear under the fury, but fear doesn't justify cruelty. I knew that from my own childhood. I think you did mean it, I said softly. You're scared. And instead of saying you're scared, you're punishing him for not reading your mind. She looked up, eyes narrowed. You think he's the only one suffering here? No, I said, but he's not the only one to blame either. Her lips tightened. She pushed up from the chair and walked away without another word. The refrigerator hummed louder, as if it were trying to fill the space her silence left. Days turned into weeks. The pattern deepened. Once he called me late at night. The line crackled faintly, the way old phone lines do. Ma, he said, do you think I'm a bad husband? The question hit me like a physical blow. I sat up in bed, the room around me dim except for the soft glow of the lamp. Why are you asking me that? I said. I can't seem to do anything right, he whispered. I come home late. She's upset. I come home on time. I'm still not enough. She says I don't touch her enough, but when I try to, she pulls away and says, I only want her when it's convenient. I cook. She hates it. I don't cook. She says I don't care. I don't know how to win anymore. You shouldn't have to win in your own marriage, I said. You should be able to be yourself without constantly proving your worth. He was quiet for a long time. I could hear the faint hum of his refrigerator through the line, like ours was humming in sympathy. You're supposed to say I'm overreacting, he said finally. You're supposed to tell me it's just a phase. I won't lie to you, I said. He let out a breath that sounded half like a laugh, half like a sob. Thanks, Ma, he said. That's somehow worse. We both fell silent, the kind that doesn't comfort, the kind that presses on the chest. Another weekend, I came over to find her mother there. They were in the living room, her mother sitting on the couch with a judgmental tilt to her mouth. My son stood nearby, holding a grocery bag like a shield. So you're saying, her mother was saying, that you're working all these hours and you still can't afford to hire a cleaner so my daughter doesn't have to bend over picking up after you? He cleared his throat. We're saving for the baby. For the hospital costs, the crib, everything else. We're managing the house ourselves. Her mother sniffed. You're the man. You should be making enough that my daughter never has to worry about that. I'm doing the best I can, he said. Her mother's gaze sharpened. Your best isn't enough if she's calling me crying every week. My daughter-in-law sat beside her, eyes red, one hand petting her belly as if cradling herself. She didn't correct her mother. Didn't say that some of those tears were about the tests she devised, about the suspicions she fed. I stepped in then, unable to stay in the doorway any longer. He's doing everything he can, I said, voice firm. I've watched him work himself to the bone. Her mother turned toward me, scanning me from head to toe. And who are you? I swallowed the sting. I'm his mother. Ah, she said, voice dripping with meaning. No wonder you're defending him. Mothers always think their sons are saints. My son flinched, his gaze flickering to me apologetically, as if he could protect me from her words. I don't think he's a saint, I said. I think he's a human being who deserves some kindness. Her mother scoffed. Kindness doesn't pay bills. And constant criticism doesn't build a home, I replied. The room went silent. The overhead light flickered once, buzzing faintly. For a moment, I thought my son might step forward, stand beside me. Instead, he shifted his weight and looked at the floor, shoulders caving. I'll work more overtime, he murmured. We'll figure it out. My heart sank. That wasn't the victory anyone needed. Later, after her mother left, I found him alone on the balcony staring down at the parking lot. The night air seeped in from the gaps in the sliding door, cold and thin. You shouldn't have to promise more, I said softly. He didn't look at me. If I work more, they can't say I'm not trying. At what cost? I asked. He shrugged. Does it matter? My chest ached. I wanted to shake him, to pull him away, to protect him the way I could when he was 10 and someone hurt his feelings at school. But he wasn't a child anymore. He was a grown man quietly erasing himself to keep the peace. The worst moment came a few nights later. I stopped by after work with a bag of groceries. When I walked in, they didn't hear me at first. The living room was dark except for the TV's blue-white glow. The light flickered over their faces, casting harsh shadows. She was standing in front of the couch, arms crossed, breathing hard. He sat on the edge, elbows on his knees, head in his hands. You really want to be a father like this? She demanded. Half here, half gone. I'm trying to make sure there's enough money when she gets here, he said. His voice was hoarse. I thought that's what being a father is. Being a father is being present, she shot back. Not just a paycheck with legs. He lifted his head slowly. Something in his eyes had gone flat. What do you want me to do? He asked. Quit my job. Then you'll hate me for that, too. I want you to fight for me, she said, voice shaking. But all you ever do is apologize. He opened his mouth, then stopped. A single bitter laugh escaped him. I don't even know what fighting for you looks like, he said. Everything feels like losing. The silence that followed felt endless. She stared at him, expecting something, anything. When he didn't move, her shoulders dropped. You know what? She said quietly, but with a precision that cut deeper than her shouting ever did. Maybe Lily was right. Maybe I should have paid more attention to how far you'd go with that girl at the gym. Maybe you said no this time, but the way you are lately, I don't know how much longer you'll keep saying it. He stared at her, stunned. The breath left his body. For a moment, I thought he would fall forward off the couch. I told her no, he whispered. The words shook. I told her I was married. That wasn't enough? She looked away. I don't know anymore. Something collapsed in him then, not with a shout, with a quiet inward folding, like a chair finally giving out under too much weight. His shoulders rounded, his hands dropped between his knees, and he stared at the floor as if he were watching his own reflection disappear. I must have made a sound, because they both turned. Her eyes widened slightly when she saw me standing there with the grocery bag in my hand. Oh, she said, you're here. I set the bag down slowly on the counter. The refrigerator hummed on cue, indifferent and constant. I heard everything, I said. My son's face crumpled, not into tears, but into something worse. Shame. "Ma," he started, voice breaking. I crossed the room and put my hand on his shoulder. He didn't look up. "You need to eat," I said softly. "Both of you. Nothing good happens on empty stomachs." My voice sounded steady. My insides did not. She exhaled loudly. "I don't want food. I want a husband who actually makes me feel wanted." I turned toward her. "Do you think tearing him down is the way to find that?" She glared at me. "You think I'm the problem?" "Of course you do." "I think the way you talk to him is breaking something in him," I said. "Something that might not come back." She opened her mouth to answer, but a sudden sharp knock at the door startled all of us. It rattled in its frame, and cold air snuck in around the edges with every vibration. We all froze. No one moved to open it. The knocking came again, harder this time, as if whoever stood outside was just as tired of being ignored as the man sitting under my hand. The knock at the door didn't stop. It came again, 3 slow, heavy strikes that echoed through the thin walls and settled into the room like a warning. My son lifted his head, startled, his eyes widening slightly. His wife stiffened, one hand instinctively moving to her belly, as if shielding the baby from whatever waited outside. I felt the cold draft push through the gap under the door, sliding over my shoes, the same draft I'd felt all my life, when my father left, when I worked the night shift alone, when my son cried silently as a boy. It always came before something changed. My son stood up slowly, the couch groaning beneath him. "I'm not expecting anyone," he murmured. Before he could reach the door, she hurried forward with a burst of sudden panic. "Wait, don't— What if it's her?" she whispered. "The girl from the gym. What if she came here?" He stared at her, stunned. "Why would she come here?" "I don't know," she snapped, her fear twisting into accusation. "Maybe you did something you're not telling me." His face collapsed, just a little, an exhausted fold at the corners of his eyes. "I told her no," he said. "Isn't that enough?" She didn't answer. The silence between them pulsed with something painful and familiar, the space where trust should have lived. The knock came again, more insistent. My son stepped forward. "I'll get it." He unlocked the door and pulled it open. Standing there was a delivery driver holding a medium-sized box with my daughter-in-law's name printed neatly across the top. Rain dotted the cardboard. His jacket was soaked around the edges. "Package?" he said, offering it out. She let out a shaky breath and took the box too quickly, as if embarrassed by her own fear. "Thanks," she murmured. The driver nodded and left. My son closed the door quietly behind him, but the tension didn't leave the room. It clung to the walls like humidity after a storm. She turned the box over once, twice, then placed it on the counter without opening it. When she exhaled, her breath trembled. I don't know what I thought. My son didn't answer. He stood by the door a moment longer, as if steadying himself before walking back into the battlefield of their conversation. He moved past her toward the living room, but she followed him, her voice sharp again. "Why did you take so long to open the door?" He stopped mid-step, back rigid. "I didn't." "You hesitated." "I didn't know who it was." "Or you didn't want me to know who it was." He turned then, slowly, like every movement took effort. "Why are you doing this?" "Doing what?" "Turning everything into proof I'm hurting you." She opened her mouth to respond, but he lifted a hand, not to silence her, not in anger, but in surrender. "I'm tired," he said softly. "I'm so tired." It wasn't a complaint. It wasn't a plea. It was the simple truth. And she heard it, really heard it, for the first time in months. Her shoulders dropped, her face softened. "You don't love me anymore," she whispered. He closed his eyes. "I love you. I just don't know how to breathe in this house anymore." Something broke inside her then, I saw it in the tremble of her chin, the way she held her belly tighter, the way her gaze flickered between wanting comfort and wanting control. "I'm scared," she said finally, voice cracking. "I don't know how to be enough for you, and every time you're tired or distant or quiet, I feel like I'm losing you." He stepped toward her, slow and hesitant, as if approaching someone who wasn't sure whether she wanted to be held or pushed away. "You're not losing me," he said. "You're pushing me away because you're afraid. You're testing me because you don't believe you're worth staying for." She blinked rapidly, stunned. He had never spoken like this. Calm, clear, awake. She took a step back. "Don't say that." "I have to," he murmured, "because I'm drowning, and you keep making the water deeper." Her hands fell to her sides. "I didn't mean to hurt you." "I know," he said, "but you did." She pressed a hand to her mouth, stifling a gasp. Tears filled her eyes, finally spilling over. She turned away from him, hiding her face. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I'm sorry I keep doing this. I don't know what's wrong with me." He reached out but stopped himself inches from her shoulder. His fingers hovered there, shaking slightly, then curled back into a fist. "You need help," he said gently. "Not from me alone, not from tests or from Lily or from your fears. You need real help, someone to talk to, someone who can tell you this isn't how love works." She shook her head violently. "I don't want a therapist. I want you." "I'm not enough for this," he said. "Not alone." The truth hung between them like an exposed wire. She faced him again. "Are you leaving me?" she whispered. "No," he said, "but something has to change. And if I can't change?" He swallowed hard. "Then I don't know how much more of myself I'll have left." She stared at him, eyes wide and shining. Then slowly, painfully, she lowered herself into a chair. Her breath hitched. She rubbed small circles on her belly, grounding herself with the reminder of the life inside her. When she finally looked up, something in her gaze had shifted. Not clarity, not acceptance, but awareness. "I didn't know I was breaking you," she said quietly. "I thought you were the strong one." He let out a tired exhale. "I'm human." For a long moment, no one moved. The refrigerator hummed again, steady and indifferent. The same sound that had followed him since he was a boy in my kitchen. It was almost symbolic, this constant noise that filled the silence when real words failed. She leaned forward slightly. "What do you need from me?" He opened his mouth, then closed it again. His jaw worked as he searched for an answer. "I need you to stop assuming the worst of me," he said. "I need you to believe me when I say I'm loyal. I need you to talk to me instead of testing me. And I need you to stop using fear as a weapon." Her chin trembled. "I didn't know I was doing that." "I know," he said. "That's why something has to change now, not later." Now. She covered her face with both hands and cried quietly. Not angrily, not theatrically, just a soft, tired collapse. Her shoulders shook, and she made no attempt to hide it. My son watched her, torn between wanting to comfort her and needing space to breathe. His hands twitched at his sides, unsure which instinct to follow. It was the first moment in months where they weren't fighting, just standing in the ruins of everything unsaid. I stepped back into the kitchen, letting them have the space. The hum of the refrigerator filled my ears. The flicker of the overhead light cast shadows that danced against the wall. Even the draft under the door felt different now, like the first cool breeze after a storm. When I turned back, he was kneeling in front of her, his hands resting gently on her knees. "I'm not asking you to be perfect," he said. "I'm asking you to stop hurting us both." She nodded slowly, tears streaking her cheeks. Then, suddenly, she whispered something so quietly, I almost didn't hear it. "I'm afraid you'll leave me after the baby comes." He inhaled sharply. "I'm afraid you'll destroy yourself before she gets here." They stared at each other, raw, exhausted, exposed. And just when it seemed they might finally begin to understand each other, her phone buzzed on the table. She looked at the screen. Her entire expression changed. The light flickered above us, and I felt the shift before she even spoke. Her phone buzzed again. She didn't move at first. She stared at the screen so long the light dimmed automatically, and only then did she tap it awake with a trembling finger. Her eyes flicked across whatever message had come in, and the shift in her expression was small but unmistakable. A tightening around her mouth, a faint pinch between her brows, the kind of look people have when something private suddenly becomes too heavy to hold alone. My son noticed immediately. "What is it?" he asked, still kneeling in front of her. "Nothing," she said too quickly, lowering the phone face down on the table. The word settled wrong in the room. Nothing is a word people use when the truth is too sharp to touch yet. He sat back slightly. "You flinched." "I didn't flinch." "You did." She wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. "I don't want to talk about it." His voice softened, but the fatigue in it made every syllable brittle. "We don't have to fight. Just tell me." She pressed her hand over her belly again. The motion was more protective now, as if whatever had arrived on her phone had threatened more than just her pride. "It's not important," she murmured, but it was. Even from across the room, the air felt different, pulling tighter, sharper. She stood slowly and walked toward the bedroom, moving with a stiff uneasiness. When the door closed behind her, my son let out a long, shuddering breath and leaned back against the couch. His head dropped into his hands. "What was that?" I asked gently. "I don't know," he whispered through his fingers. He stayed like that a long time, shoulders rising and falling with slow, exhausted breaths. I didn't touch him. Not yet. Sometimes comfort feels like pressure when someone is trying not to fall apart. After a minute, he stood and walked into the kitchen. He opened the fridge and stared inside as if he'd forgotten what he was doing. The hum filled the silence between us. "You need to eat something," I said softly. "I'm not hungry." "You still need to eat." He closed the fridge door without taking anything. "I feel like I'm always behind," he said. "Every conversation, every task, every judgment, like I'm 2 steps too slow to prove anything." "That's because she keeps moving the finish line," I replied gently. He leaned against the counter, eyes distant. "Maybe I should start writing things down." "What things?" "What I do, what I say, what time I come home, what time I call, what she asks for, what actually happens." He let out a hollow laugh. "Like keeping notes at work, evidence, so she can't twist things later." The word evidence hung strangely in the air. It didn't belong in a marriage, but here he was, contemplating record-keeping to survive his own home. "When did you start feeling like you needed proof?" I asked quietly. "When she started saying I wasn't trying," he said. "When she said I never told her things, I know I told her. When she accused me of flirting with the coworker who's been married 20 years. He shook his head slowly. "I don't know what reality is sometimes. I hear myself apologizing for things I never did just to stop the fight. The truth of it pressed hard against my chest. That isn't normal," I whispered. He pushed away from the counter abruptly, hands trembling. "I know." Then softer. "I know." He walked to the hallway and stared at the closed bedroom door. A thin line of weak light leaked from underneath. The same draft brushed out through the gap, cold, restless, shifting. "Do you think she's hiding something?" he asked. "I think she's overwhelmed," I said carefully, "and scared. And she turns fear into accusation because she doesn't know another way to feel in control." He nodded, but didn't fully believe it. "Her mother keeps telling her she should watch me closely. Her friends, I don't know what they tell her, but every time she looks at me, she looks like she's searching for something. Suspicion, failure, betrayal waiting to happen, a shape of love warped by fear." He paced across the living room, one hand rubbing the back of his neck. "Maybe I should start going through our messages, saving things, screenshots, just so I can show her what was actually said. You shouldn't have to live like that, I said. He stopped in front of the coffee table, bracing himself against it. Then what do I do? Before I could answer, the bedroom door cracked open. She stepped out slowly, holding something in her hand, a small folded paper. She didn't look at either of us as she crossed the room. Her face was pale now, not angry or accusatory. Pale like someone seeing the edge of a cliff they didn't know they were standing on. She set the folded paper on the counter. "This came earlier today," she said quietly. "I didn't want to show you." My son stiffened. "What is it?" "I don't know who sent it." She swallowed. "But it made me think things I shouldn't have thought." He moved toward the paper, but she placed a hand over it suddenly. "Before you look," she whispered, "I want you to know I didn't send it. I swear to God, and I didn't ask anyone to send it." He froze. "What is it?" She removed her hand slowly. The paper was torn from a spiral notebook. Handwritten words filled the page in uneven strokes. I couldn't read it from where I stood, but whatever message was there had rattled her deeply. My son unfolded the paper. His face went blank, completely blank. "What does it say?" I asked. He didn't answer immediately. His eyes scanned the page again, and again. His chest rose with a slow inhale. She stepped closer, voice trembling. "I didn't write that. I don't even know who would say something like that." The way she said it, the way her hand hovered near his arm but didn't dare touch him, made the air feel suddenly sharper. "Read it aloud," she whispered. He didn't. Instead, he folded the paper back up with careful, trembling fingers and slipped it into his pocket. "Why aren't you showing me?" she asked, panic rushing back into her voice. "Because I don't want you to see it," he said. That single sentence chilled the room. She reached for him. "What does that mean?" "It means," he said quietly, "that someone wants us to tear each other apart. And from the looks of it, it's working." Her hand fell to her side. She stared at him, stunned. "Who would do that?" she whispered. He shook his head. "I don't know." But in the stillness that followed, I watched something shift behind his eyes, a realization, a calculation, a quiet suspicion tightening into focus. He suddenly walked past both of us and went to the hall closet. He pulled out a shoebox filled with loose papers, receipts, medical bills, and notes, messy but familiar. He dumped it onto the coffee table and began sorting through it. "What are you doing?" she asked. "Looking for patterns," he murmured. "Looking for things we missed." She stepped toward him slowly, not sure if he needed space or support. "Patterns of what?" "Who's been talking to you? Who's been advising you? Who's been in your ear about me?" Her breath caught. "You think my friends did this?" He didn't answer. He sifted through papers with quiet urgency. Appointment reminders, baby registry lists, prenatal instructions, old sticky notes. He set aside anything that looked like handwriting, scanning each page. His movements weren't frantic. They were focused, controlled. The beginning of clarity after months of fog. She knelt beside him. "Please don't shut me out," she whispered. "I'm not shutting you out," he said. "I'm trying to save what's left before it breaks completely." His voice didn't shake this time. He found a note, one small scrap tucked between receipts. He froze. She leaned forward, eyes widening. "Where did that come from?" she asked. He turned it over slowly. "You tell me." "I've never seen it before," she insisted, but her voice wavered. I watched her reaction. Not guilt, not fear, confusion, genuine confusion. My son placed the scrap aside separately and kept searching. Every sound in the room magnified. The flickering overhead light, the rustle of paper, the faint creak of the hallway floorboards. Even the refrigerator hum seemed to pulse with the rhythm of his work. He wasn't just gathering evidence now. He was preparing to face a truth, one neither of them had been ready to name. An hour passed like that, quiet, methodical, tense. She hovered between guilt and bewilderment. I watched him shift from exhaustion to determination. When he finally stopped moving, his hands rested on 3 slips of paper, 3 pieces of handwriting that didn't belong to him or to her. He stared at them, a muscle in his jaw twitching. Then he whispered, "I think I know who's been feeding this." Her breath caught. Who? He didn't look at her. He didn't look at me. He simply stared at the papers as if they were the missing pieces of something he'd been afraid to admit for months. And when he finally lifted his eyes, the clarity in them startled me. But before he could speak, someone knocked again. Not on their door. On the building's front entrance downstairs. A voice followed, muffled, familiar, calling her name. She went pale. My son stood slowly. "I think," he said quietly, "we're about to find out exactly who's been pulling the strings." The voice calling her name echoed through the stairwell, distorted slightly by the metal and concrete. It wasn't loud, but it carried. A familiar pitch, sharpened by agitation. She froze beside the coffee table, her fingers clutching a stack of papers she hadn't realized she was holding. My son stood perfectly still, the 3 slips of handwriting pinned under his palm like evidence in a case he'd been assembling quietly all along. Another knock sounded at the building's main entrance downstairs, not frantic, but confident, expectant. My daughter-in-law's breath hitched. That's Lily," she whispered. Her best friend, the one who helped orchestrate the loyalty test, the one whose cousin had been sent to flirt with my son after the gym, the one whose advice had echoed through every accusation, every insecurity, every disaster the past few months. My son didn't move. "Why is she here?" I don't know," she stammered. "She didn't say she was coming." But something in her voice betrayed her. Unease, doubt, a tiny crack in certainty. "She's been at your side for every argument," my son said quietly. "Every suspicion, every test, every escalation." "That's not fair," she muttered, but even she didn't believe it. A buzz from the intercom startled us all. Lily's voice followed, clearer now. "Open the door. I know you're home." She wasn't angry. She was impatient, like someone eager to see the result of a plan she had been tracking closely. My son lifted the 3 papers off the table. His hands didn't shake now. Determination had steadied them. "Let her up," he said. My daughter-in-law turned toward him, eyes wide in panic. "Why?" "Because this doesn't end in whispers and stairwell gossip," he said. "Not anymore." His voice carried a finality that made her lower her gaze. He pressed the button. The building door buzzed open downstairs. Footsteps followed, sharp, brisk, climbing the stairs with the speed of someone who didn't expect resistance. Each step echoed, louder than it should have been. The overhead light flickered once, humming above us as if it too felt the tension thickening the air. Then came the knock on the apartment door, a quick, confident rhythm. My son opened it. Lily swept inside without waiting for an invitation. Her expression was bright with manufactured concern, her eyes flicking immediately to my daughter-in-law's face as if searching for tears she could collect and polish into justification. "Oh my God," she said, rushing forward. "I came as soon as I heard." "Heard what?" my son asked quietly. She blinked, thrown off. "What do you mean? She texted me." "I didn't text you," my daughter-in-law said, confused. Lily laughed lightly, dismissively. "You must have forgotten. Pregnancy brain, right? It happens." But my daughter-in-law didn't smile. She looked between Lily and my son, unsettled. "We're in the middle of something," my son said. "Sit down." The words weren't rude. They were deliberate. Lily opened her mouth, instinctively ready to refuse, but something in his expression made her pause. She sat on the edge of the couch, posture stiff, gaze darting around the room as if looking for alliances. "What's going on?" she asked. "You look like you've seen a ghost." My son placed the 3 slips of paper on the table between them. "Why don't you tell me?" he said. She glanced at them briefly, uninterested. "What are those?" "That's what we'd like to know," I said from the kitchen doorway. She turned toward me, masking annoyance with a polite smile. "Oh, hello. I didn't realize you were here." "I've been here," I replied. My son took the paper from his pocket, the folded note that had arrived earlier. He placed it beside the others. 4 pieces now, 4 handwriting samples. "Do you know what this is?" he asked. Lily looked at the folded note again. Something flickered across her face. Recognition, quickly buried. "No," she said, too quickly. He unfolded the paper and held it out to her. Her eyes skimmed the writing. Her throat tightened. My daughter-in-law watched her, fear etched across her features. "What does it say?" My son didn't answer. Instead, he handed the note to his wife. She hesitated, then took it. Her eyes raced across the words, and I watched the color drain from her face. Her lips parted. She inhaled sharply. What is this?" she whispered, voice trembling. "What does it say?" Lily asked, leaning forward as if she hadn't already memorized each line. My daughter-in-law read aloud in a thin, shaking voice. "He's been leaving the gym with another woman. People have seen them. Don't trust him." The room held its breath. She lowered the paper slowly. "Who sent this?" she whispered. "That's what we're trying to find out," my son said. Lily crossed her legs casually, as if trying to maintain control. "Anyone could have sent that. You two have been having issues. People talk." "Not like this," he said softly. He lifted one of the slips from the table. This was in our mailbox 2 weeks ago. She never told me." My daughter-in-law snapped her head toward him. "Because it scared me. It was the same handwriting." Lily's expression twitched, a tightening near her mouth. Too fast. He lifted another paper. "This one was slipped under our door the night she cried for 6 hours straight because she thought I didn't love her anymore." My daughter-in-law gasped. I thought someone did," he murmured, "but not who we thought." He held up the 3rd slip. "And this one?" This one was in her coat pocket, a reminder that most men cheat when their wives are pregnant. She thought she'd picked it up from a store counter. But the handwriting. He placed all 4 papers side by side. Same slant, same letter loops, same spacing. My daughter-in-law stared at them, realization twisting slowly, painfully across her face. She looked at Lily. "You told me that statistic," she whispered. "About men cheating. You told me people saw him with someone. You said—" Lily stood abruptly. "Okay, this is getting ridiculous." My son didn't look away. "Sit." She froze mid-step. Something in his tone made her obey. He leaned forward slightly. The shift in the room was palpable, not loud, not violent, but decisive. "You've been feeding her doubts for months," he said. "Every time we had a fight, every time she cried, every time she accused me, you were there, whispering, encouraging, adding fuel." "That's not true," Lily said, though her voice trembled. "You told her to test me. That was a joke. You sent someone to flirt with me." "I didn't send anyone," she said, her eyes darting. "You organized it," he replied. "You planned the whole thing. You picked the girl." Lily swallowed. "She needed reassurance. She needed support," he said. "You gave her poison." My daughter-in-law wiped her cheeks. "Why would you do this to us?" Lily scoffed. "To you? I did this for you, to protect you. He works too much. He ignores you. He barely pays attention. You deserve better than being taken for granted." My son stared at her. "Taking care of my family is not taking her for granted." Lily leaned back, arms crossing defensively. "You're both acting dramatic. She was lonely. She came to me. I did what any friend would do." "Friends don't destroy marriages," my son said. Lily's mask cracked then, just a hairline fracture, but enough to see the envy beneath. I recognized it instantly. I'd seen that look in girls who wanted what others had but didn't know how to admit it. "I didn't destroy anything," she muttered. "You sent fake notes," he said. "You planted doubt. You made her believe I was cheating so she'd lean on you. You isolated her. You made her depend on your approval. That's not true, Lily snapped, standing again. She needed me. My daughter-in-law stared at her friend with a hollowed expression. Is that why you kept saying he was pulling away? Why you told me men lose attraction when their wives get pregnant? Why you said I had to test him before it was too late? Lily's jaw tightened. I was trying to help. You never liked that he chose me, my daughter-in-law whispered. You pretended, but you hated it. That's insane. You hated it, she repeated louder now, because he never looked at you the way he looks at me. Silence. Thick. Sharp. Lily's face flushed red. Don't flatter yourself. My son's expression didn't change, but his breathing did. Just a little. A realization settling into place he hadn't allowed himself to consider before. You sent those notes, he said quietly. All of them. Lily turned toward the door. I'm not doing this. My daughter-in-law blocked her path. Why? Lily stepped back. Move. Why? She whispered again. But this time the question wavered between heartbreak and rage. Lily looked at her belly. Her voice dropped to a cutting whisper. Because you're ruining your life. You think he wants this baby? You think he's happy? He told people he hates how much you've changed. He told people he feels trapped. My son's head snapped up. I never said that. He did, Lily insisted. No, I said from the doorway. You did. Her head whipped toward me. I stepped slowly into the room, the draft brushing past my ankles, the overhead light flickering as if punctuating each step. You said those things, I repeated. You whispered them into her fears. You used her vulnerability to make your voice louder than his. Lily swallowed, but the bravado faltered. My son lifted the 4 papers. This ends now. Her voice sharpened. You can't prove anything. He met her eyes calmly. I don't have to prove it. You already did. She blinked. What? You came running the moment she cried, he said. Not because you cared, he held her gaze, but because you wanted to see how much damage you'd done. Her mouth opened, but no sound came out. Then slowly, as the overhead light buzzed and flickered above us, he delivered a line that froze the entire room. You never wanted to help her. You wanted to replace her. Every muscle in Lily's face clenched, but her eyes betrayed her. A single flash of truth. My daughter-in-law staggered back as if struck. Her hand flew to her mouth. Tears welled hot and fast. Get out, she whispered. Lily looked between them, panicked now, unraveling. She's lying, Lily said, pointing at me. She didn't say it, my son said. I did. His voice was steady, unyielding. Lily's breath hitched. I didn't mean, get out, he repeated. This time it wasn't a whisper. It was a verdict. The room held still. Even the refrigerator seemed to pause its hum. Lily stepped backward, blinking rapidly as she tried to salvage her dignity. But dignity doesn't follow lies out the door. She grabbed her purse, avoided my gaze entirely, and slipped out of the apartment without another word. The moment the door closed, my daughter-in-law collapsed onto the couch, sobbing. My son sank into the chair opposite her, drained. I stood between them both, feeling the weight of the moment settle deep into the floorboards. Then, from the other side of the door, footsteps paused. A soft, unmistakable sound followed. Lily hadn't left the building. She was waiting, listening. For what, none of us yet knew. For a long time after the door clicked shut, no one moved. The apartment felt strangely hollow, as if all the noise of the past months had finally drained out through the seams. My daughter-in-law sat curled on the couch, shoulders trembling, her hands resting protectively over her belly. My son leaned forward in the chair across from her, elbows on his knees, watching her with an expression I hadn't seen on his face in months. Exhaustion, yes, but also clarity. The frantic searching in his eyes was gone. What remained was quieter, steadier, and deeply tired. The overhead light flickered once, but not harshly this time, just a soft blink before it steadied again. And strangely, it didn't feel like a warning. It felt like something settling. My daughter-in-law wiped her eyes with both hands. "I didn't see it," she whispered. "I didn't see what she was doing to me." My son nodded slowly. "Fear makes it hard to see anything else." She looked at him through smeared lashes. "I hurt you." He didn't deny it, but he didn't weaponize it either. "We hurt each other," he said softly, "but we're not going to keep doing that." Her breath shook as she exhaled. "I don't know how to fix this." "You don't have to fix everything today," he said. "We just need to stop bleeding long enough to heal." She cried again, quietly this time. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I'm sorry I believed her. I'm sorry I tested you. I'm sorry I made you doubt yourself." His jaw tightened. "I'm sorry I didn't tell you sooner that I was drowning." They stayed like that, two people stripped down to the truth. No accusations, no defensiveness, just two wounded hearts recognizing each other again without all the noise between them. I stepped closer and placed my hand gently on my son's shoulder. He looked up at me, eyes tired but open. "You don't have to carry all of this alone," I said. He nodded, and for the first time in a long time, I saw relief in the small lift of his expression. Then his wife reached out and took his hand. "I want help," she whispered. "Real help. Not from friends who feed my fears." He squeezed her hand gently. "Then we'll get help, together." She cried again, but this time it sounded lighter. Not happy, not yet, but real, honest. The refrigerator hummed in the background, the same sound that had followed us through every chapter of this story. But today it felt different. Not like a reminder of strain, but of routine. Normalcy. The hum of life continuing after a storm. My son stood and walked to the balcony door. He bent down and sealed the draft at the bottom with an old towel, pressing it firmly against the gap. The cold air stopped immediately. I watched him, and something warmed quietly in my chest. For months, that draft had brushed through the apartment like a ghost of every fear they couldn't name. Now it was shut out with a simple, deliberate act. When he turned back toward us, the room didn't look as heavy. My daughter-in-law whispered, "Do you think we'll be okay?" My son walked back and knelt in front of her, hands resting on her knees. "I think we're choosing each other again," he said. "That's where okay starts." She leaned forward until their foreheads touched, and the simplicity of that gesture nearly undid me. Outside, footsteps moved down the hallway, Lily finally leaving the building. This time she didn't pause, didn't linger. Her absence felt like the first real breath the apartment had taken in months. I gathered my things quietly. "I'll give you two some space," I said. But my daughter-in-law reached out, catching my hand. "Thank you," she whispered, "for being here, for seeing what I couldn't." I nodded. Seeing is easier from the outside. Living it is harder. You're both stronger than you think. As I stepped into the hallway, I turned back once more. They were still holding each other's hands, still leaning close as if afraid to let the moment slip away. The overhead light flickered once more, settling into a warm, steady glow. For the first time in a long while, the apartment looked like a place where a family could breathe again. And as I walked toward the elevator, the quiet draft beneath their door no longer followed me. It stayed behind, where it belonged, no longer shaping their story. Just a memory now, a lesson, a starting point, and maybe, finally, the end of a long winter for all of us. The draft under their door used to feel like warning, but tonight it reminds me how far we've come. If my story touched something in your heart, let me know. Sometimes even a small message feels like a warm room after months of cold air. If you stayed with me to the end, thank you. Your presence means more than you know.